The modern survival narrative almost always begins with a pack. Loadouts, wait lists, modular systems, and redundancy dominate the conversation. Yet history tells a quieter, less marketable truth. For most of human existence, people survived without backpacks, kits, or carefully curated gear. When things went wrong, survival depended on what could be carried on the body, remembered in the head, and built from the environment. That reality hasn't changed as much as we like to think. Understanding survival without a backpack forces a shift in mindset. It removes the safety net of stored equipment and exposes what actually matters when you are cut off, displaced, or forced to move suddenly. Why being separated from gear was normal, not exceptional. Wars, migrations, disasters, and accidents rarely unfold neatly. Soldiers were captured, units were scattered, camps were overrun, and people fled with nothing but what they wore. Early explorers routinely lost equipment to rivers, animals, and weather. Nomadic groups traveled light because speed and adaptability mattered more than possessions. Historical survival was built around the assumption that gear would be lost. Skills were chosen accordingly. Anything that required constant access to equipment was unreliable by definition. The body was the first survival system. Clothing was not just protection from weather, it was storage, shelter, signaling, and insulation. Belts held tools, cloaks doubled as blankets and shelters. Footwear was chosen for repairability, not comfort. Even hats served multiple purposes, from water collection to insulation. Survivors layered their clothing with intent. Pockets were not decoration. They carried fire-starting materials, cordage, and small blades on their person because separation from these items meant failure. What mattered was not how much you carried, but where you carried it. Fire-making without kits or containers. Fire did not require a pouch full of tools. It required knowledge of local materials and patience. People carried ember knowledge more than ignition devices. Coals were transported in bark, fungus, or hollowed wood. Fires were preserved rather than restarted. When ignition was needed, friction methods, stone strikes, and natural tinders were used. These methods were slower, but they did not depend on stored gear. The ability to create fire anywhere eventually mattered more than speed. Shelter came from terrain, not tarps. Survival shelters were not elaborate structures. They were wind blocks, ground insulation, and overhead protection. People used fallen trees, rock overhangs, snowdrifts, and depressions. The goal was to reduce exposure, not create comfort. Ground insulation mattered more than walls. Dry leaves, grass, pine needles, and bark separated the body from cold earth. Even a shallow scrape with insulation could mean the difference between survival and hypothermia. Navigation without tools. Well, it really relied on pattern recognition. Before there were compasses and maps, people found their way by paying close attention to the terrain, the flow of water, the patterns in vegetation, and even cues from the stars above. Rivers acted as highways, ridges would guide travel, and, wind patterns and the position of the sun gave a sense of orientation. More importantly, people actually limited their movement. They traveled only when it was absolutely necessary, and most of the time stuck to paths they already knew. Getting lost was something to be avoided by using restraint, not by relying on technology. When it came to water and food, without containers or tools, people had to be resourceful. Water was accessed directly from sources whenever possible, or collected using natural vessels like bark, gourds, or animal skins. Snow was sometimes melted in mouthfuls to avoid lowering body temperature, and dew could be collected from vegetation. Food acquisition prioritized low-energy methods. Traps, foraging, and scavenging beat pursuit. People ate what was available, not what was ideal. Survival calories mattered more than balanced diets. Why minimal survival still works today. The environment has not changed. Physics has not changed. What has changed is expectation. Modern survival advice often assumes access to equipment. History shows that separation from gear is not hypothetical. It is common. Practicing survival without a backpack builds resilience. It forces prioritization. It sharpens decision-making. It reveals how little is truly required to stay alive when behavior aligns with reality. So, this does not mean abandoning modern tools. What it really means is understanding that tools are supplements, not foundations. What history consistently teaches us is, well, pretty clear. Survival without a backpack works because it's built around loss, uncertainty, and adaptability. It really depends on the skills that travel with you and those decisions you make that conserve energy. Those who survived history's hardest moments, they didn't do so because they were well equipped. Honestly, they made it through because they were prepared to function without equipment at all. If you value survival knowledge that's grounded in what actually worked for thousands of years, then, subscribe to the channel and share this with others who understand that real preparedness begins long before the pack is ever loaded. Strange,